is one particular teacher necessary? And also, connected or separately, I would like another or an explanation of what is the direct path. I mean, okay. I enjoy this.
Okay, these are two questions. Okay. So, the first question, theoretically, a human teacher is not necessary. There are sages who didn't have a human teacher. However, if you have already met a teacher, it was necessary. The direct path because there is a misconception about what the direct path means. There was this gentleman in England, he had a website on non-duality or Advaita. He contacted me a long time ago on the internet, for those who were internet nerds at the time, in the very early 1990s. And he presents the direct path as being a specific tradition, like Francis Lucille had mentioned other, Admananda Krishna Menon. And that's not what it means. It means the path after a glimpse that creates an irreversible doubt about the limited nature of consciousness. You see, a glimpse, a realization, and as a result of this understanding or realization, we are not sure any longer that our consciousness is limited in any fashion or form. For instance, that it has a beginning in time, an end in time, that it is dependent upon this human body, that it is localized in space. So whatever spiritual progress or takes place from this doubt is what I call the direct path. Because when we come from this doubt, we cannot come from the belief to be a separate entity. You understand that? We cannot, at the same time, believe to be a separate and limited entity or consciousness and not believe it, right? Meaning having a doubt. So, as long as we are on the spiritual path, still believing to be a separate consciousness is not the direct path. Any moment, we are on the spiritual path, but with this not believing to be a separate and limited consciousness, we are on the direct path. So that's a clear, I hope, explanation, because at any moment we we can ask ourselves, am I certain to be a separate consciousness or not? And we can find the answer within ourselves.
But you said we could, the three energy, Shiva, we can...
It corresponds to that, yes. The gradual path is, in the Trika tradition, what is called the path of the individual. And the direct path would be the path of the energy. Because there is still a path. There is still somehow a question asked, just as a scientist asked by conducting an experiment, asks nature a question. The outcome of the experiment is nature's answer to the question which is asked by the scientist. I don't know. Is there gravity on the surface of the Earth? So you conduct the experiment I conducted the other day. The answer is yes. Okay, that's nature's answer. So, in a similar fashion, on the direct path, because we have doubts about consciousness being limited, we conduct experiments asking reality, consciousness, are you limited or not? The response we get to this question is God's answer, if you will. When we get the answer, we are no longer on the direct path. We are in God's hands. Whether we stay there or not, but when we get the answer, we know. And in this knowing, that's what is called the path of Shiva in the Trika tradition. If the doubt arises again, we can always ask the question again. So we move from one path to the other. But once we have this glimpse, which is irreversible, this irreversible doubt, somehow we cannot really fall back into the belief to be separate. Old habits of separation may still seem to be active and may seem to trigger the old reactions, the old behavioral patterns, but they cannot stick. But already, as we conduct the experiments, we are already in wisdom. That also is important to understand. When we make a bet, the French philosopher Pascal, philosopher, physicist, mathematician, he had a very powerful glimpse, and that changed his life, but he was within the parameters of Christianity. And then he had this argument that we should bet that God exists. Because we don't know, so it's like 50-50, right? If it doesn't exist, we have nothing to lose. If it does exist, we have everything to win. But it's not the correct way to play your money at the casino. Because this outcome of the existence of God, you get the reward in the afterlife. You don't get an immediate reward, you know. So what I suggest is a different type of bet. You bet that consciousness is universal, since you don't know whether it's universal or not. Right? If it is not universal, you have nothing to lose, because it will be the way it used to be before. If it is universal, every time you bet in this direction, you get a reward, because the outcome is more harmony both within you and without. So it's a kind of win-win situation. It's like going to the casino and knowing where the chips are going to fall. And you don't have to wait for too long. So you can enjoy the rewards in this world, because, you know, the scripture says, peace on earth, I don't know, paix sur terre aux hommes de bonne volonté, peace on earth to the men and women of goodwill. I don't know the exact formulation in English. It doesn't say peace in heaven later on after you're dead. It says right now, if you're of goodwill, meaning if you make the right bet, you experience the peace now. So that's the direct path, to be open to the possibility that consciousness is universal, and constantly playing at the casino at every moment, always on the same side.
And wanting to forcibly get out of the path of jiva, is that a bad thing? Or, you know, to want to progress, to be on the path of energy all the time?
Well, it's a free country. We remain, it is not imposed onto us to believe to be a separate entity. Therefore, if we choose to believe that way, it's our freedom. Many people choose that way, although they have an intuition of the divine, so they have this mystic fiber in them, but they are reluctant to give up their separate identity.
Is it scary, or, I mean, to live in the world and...
No, they can be religious people. They can have some mystical experience, revelation of God. But at the same time, they see themselves as a separate reality of God, from God. So in a sense, every sage is a mystic. Although it may not look that way, but every sage is a mystic because the experience of pure consciousness is the experience of God. And they have the same love for the Absolute. But every mystic is not a sage to the extent that they are still on the progressive path. And they still see themselves as a separate consciousness.
Hi, Francis. Hi, Francis. Sometimes I notice the discrete nature of experience.
That what?
I notice the discrete nature of experience where when my attention moves from a thought to a perception to a bodily sensation, it seems choppy. I don't remember if there is a gap. It feels like there is a gap.
Yes, there are gaps. Often, there are often gaps in the flow of perceptions. Yes.
Is that what you call consciousness without objects?
In the gap, yes. Yes, there are perceptions that seem to be continuous, but there are also abrupt changes in perception. Yeah. Like, for instance, you're walking in the street, someone calls your name. So you're walking in the street, you are thinking of your next vacation. Someone calls your name, it stops this train of thought right in its tracks. So there is a gap there, yes.
So it almost feels like the analogy that if you're watching a movie in a theater, although you are seeing a continuous movie, but there is a knowing that there are images being flashed at.
That's very true. That's very true. And there is this possibility that there are many more gaps that we can remember, you see? Because somehow, but then I am in a domain that I'm not qualified to speak about, but it's just an uneducated guess that because the neurons, the nervous system works through neurons firing, and there is kind of a build-up, right? And then the neuron fires. So a neuron, either it fires or it doesn't. So it seems from this view of the neural systems, I'm not talking about computers here, it seems that at its very foundation, the nervous system is discrete, is binary, because either a neuron fires or it doesn't. But that's just a guess. So if it is binary, it means that there are gaps everywhere, at every moment. Since the transmission, you have a network, right? And all the transmissions through this network, there are no continuous transmissions. So the outcome, whatever the port out of the system is, has to be a yes or no digital type of.
It's very obvious to me when there is a shift between a thought and a perception sensation.
Yes.
But I've also conducted experiments where I'm just perceiving allegedly static object, and there are shifts within that have the same choppiness, not as obvious as between a thought and a perception, which led me to this corollary question as to, could you speak about what is a perception between two what's the duration of a perception? Like, it's obvious to me what is a thought. There is no thought, no thought, like arising. There is sensation, flow of sensation, no sensation. But when if I'm just looking out, yes, although the things are moving, but in between, even if I'm looking at a static object, there is a shift that I perceive, which has the same gap-like thing.
Every time there is a shift. And there are many more shifts that we don't remember. Because what we call I perceive the shift is because the shift in question left a trace in memory. Or because the shift brought about, to be more precise, during the shift, there is a change, right, in memory, and then by accessing the memory of the way it was before and the way it is after, we notice the change, right? By combining two memories into a kind of a gate that combines both and says the output of this gate is they are the same or they are different, right? Basically, that's but these are just models we're talking about, and that's why I say I'm out of my I'm not qualified to really, just educated guesses. And I think people who work with neural networks, and or people who work with neuroscience, they are very interested in these questions. What I am interested in is the gap as an experience. And because when we understand that we are present in the gap between two perceptions, that's the important point. If we understand I am present as consciousness, I am conscious, I am aware in the gap between two perceptions, that changes the picture. Because most people believe that there is no consciousness in the absence of perceptions. You see? So most people will say, no, there is no such a thing. Every time there is consciousness, there is a perception. That's why I give examples such as what happens in the moment of understanding. Because in the moment of understanding, that which is understood, whatever that is, which appeared before as a question, is no longer there. But the formulated answer is not there yet. right? But we are very much there because we are very conscious that it is we who understand. It's not somebody else. I am very much present at the moment of understanding. However, I don't have a memory of it. I cannot remember what was going on at the moment of understanding. I can remember what was before and what was after, because that was recordable in memory. Because memory, the memory process can only record phenomena, right? Something which is non-phenomenal cannot be recorded because it is a nothingness. But at the same time, it is not a nothingness because we are present as consciousness. But it is a nothingness which is always present, in fact, which is the background of all perceptions, and which is beyond time and space, you see? So it's a magical thing, what happens between two persons when we understand that. So it is important to be open to the possibility of the experience of consciousness in the absence of objects. That's why I use the example of what happens in the moment of understanding. That's why I use the Pope joke. I'm not going to use, we have to wait for the next one. Okay, you laughed. You see, there was a moment of understanding. I say, and it's very. So we are open to the possibilities that we are present in this moment as consciousness, like the bridge between two perceptions. And another example I use is when we say, "Oh, I just became aware that." In fact, I just became awareness, and in this awareness, something appeared, right? Before that, I was driving and thinking about something else, and all of a sudden, I remember, gee, I forgot my driver's license. You see? It comes right there, out of the blue. I became aware that I had forgotten my wallet with the driver's license in it, and the cops is just right there, asking me to stop with a flash. So, once we are open to the possibility, to this possibility of consciousness without perceptions, you know, and the other example I use, this one is even different, more powerful. The moment we know experientially that I am conscious, you see. What kind of experience is it? It's like that. It doesn't last. People say it's because there are objects present. But no, because they say it's because there is this computer present. Okay, the perception of the computer tells me there is a computer. It tells me computer. It doesn't tell me consciousness. Perhaps reflecting afterward my computer, I said, oh yes, I was perceiving the computer. But then in order to have this thought, before this thought, there is the experience of consciousness. So the experience of consciousness, through which I know there is consciousness, I know, is an experience in which there are no objects. That's why it's so instantaneous. And it's different from an experience of understanding of a joke, because the understanding of a joke is an understanding about a joke. It's not an understanding about consciousness, whereas the experience of consciousness brings about an understanding about consciousness. Like There is consciousness. That's already something. There is consciousness. And what's the difference between me and consciousness? I say I perceive. So I am. When I perceive consciousness, I perceive myself. You know, my true nature is consciousness. That's a second glimpse, you see. And the liberating glimpse is when I understand that I have no way to know that this consciousness is dependent upon anything else. In other words, that whatever I believe about consciousness based upon phenomenal experience has no value. No value. I repeat, that's important. Whatever I believe about consciousness based upon phenomenal experience, meaning upon perceptions that appear in consciousness, thoughts, bodily sensations, sense perceptions, is not valid. Whatever I believe, whatever I perceive through consciousness, phenomenally, cannot give me any information about consciousness. It's even a more general conclusion. Whatever I perceive through consciousness cannot give me any information about consciousness. Whatever I perceive phenomenally. However, I know that consciousness exists, I know that I'm conscious, but I know it through a different channel, called the Advaita channel, and this one. Now! Okay. Yes. And I don't know anywhere where I was. That's the age. Yeah. I can know stuff about consciousness, but through these different channels. That's the only channel. In other words, it could be expressed also differently. Only I can say anything experientially about consciousness. Nobody else can, from their phenomenal experience, can tell me anything about consciousness. From their noumenal experience, which is the same as mine, that's a different story. So that if someone tells you something from their noumenal experience, then the words, if you understand the language, right? The words, because they come from this noumenal experience, the words can point at it. The words will never replace the noumenal experience. Someone who has no interest for it can read 10 times Ramana Maharshi's, whatever it's called, they will remain in ignorance. Someone else can hear just one short sentence and, yeah, that makes sense. That's my experience and that's it. So that's why the understanding is so important. In the Indian tradition, often it is said that a moment of meditation is worth a lifetime of practice, right? But what they mean by meditation is this. It's this glimpse of realization. This initiation, if you will, this instantaneous liberation from the false, from the past. the recognition of the truth.
Thank you, Francis.
So Fred and I were talking after lunch and talking about how AI is just, logarithmically, growing and competent. And so maybe even in our lifetime, there may be a point where this is like so perfectly constructed, but it's AI. How would you tell? Because most of the noumenal thing is interior. How would you tell?
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, how would you tell if the person you're talking to is AI or a person?
You won't be able to tell. It's called the Turing test. Turing test, you have either a human or a computer in a different room, and you interact with this system. And you can ask all the questions you want, and then can you answer the question, is it a human or a computer? And then you can put all kinds of human beings, right, trying to do that, and you can have a statistical evaluation. It used to be easy to check out. There was perhaps a few months ago in the New York Times. There were short essays, like one paragraph each. I think there were 9 essays. And you had to answer, is it man-made or is it computer-generated? There were 9 essays. And went to the first one, I say computer-generated. Second one, computer. All of them, I decided they were computer-generated. And I was wondering, gee, I must be wrong, because they may have mixed them. But no, I was right. They were all computer-generated. But in the future, no. I speak with Grok 3 on a regular fashion, and it's very... they are extraordinarily patient, so you like that. You know? They don't get aggravated, you know, because you can ask the same question. You ask them, you know, slightly different, no aggravation. You know, they repeat the same thing, you know, and then also they make a mistake, and you say, no, here you have a problem, and they say, oh yes, you're right, my apologies. Let's try to unpack that again, you know, and they give you another. By the way, the term unpack is very in fashion nowadays, you know, instead of to elaborate or to, you know, the old-fashioned way, right, to unpack. So let's unpack. So even Grok 3 speaks contemporary language, right? I try to ask him about non-duality, you know, that's very interesting. We are close, extremely close to the moment when we won't be able. I guess a robot that looks like a human, we're a little further away, will be able to tell, you know, this robot is not a real human. But if you communicate just through typing, you know.
We were talking because at a certain point they're going to develop where even physically you wouldn't be able to distinguish.
That we are very remote from that. I mean, the technology is.
But still, okay. So there's got to be a way. I mean, because like when you talk to us, you're like, I'm not talking to the body mind, which is a machine. So AI would just be a better than us, highly operating machine. But you're talking to consciousness. There's shared meaning. There's subtleties.
Yeah, but you see, it's going to be very difficult to have a physical object that can fool you. So I think in the future, to make this determination whether you are talking to a human body, you know, you go on a dating, on a dating place, you know, you would never know whether you are talking to a person or to a robot. So you say, okay, let's meet. I guess it will be the only way, right? Now for a few centuries, you'll be safe. In 200 years, you may be fooled.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you.
Back to the gaps, I have I think a similar question. In your book, Perfume of Silence, you talk about the blank state, and you say that it's a manifestation of trying to visualize the truth. And I'd love to just hear more about that, because throughout my life I've had this, I guess, awareness of just like a blankness. There's no thought, there's no questions, and I've always thought there's something wrong with me. I would have creative directors that would say, try to put me in a room and tell me to think. And when I read that about the blank state, I wasn't sure if it's, like how to tell the difference between that blank state and just being in the I am or in the gap.
Okay, the state without perception, which is truly without perception, no time elapses, because it's beyond time. That's why, how long does it take to understand? You know, it's instantaneous. But in fact, in this moment, the background of all perception, it's eternity. You know, it's timeless. But if you go through it, in the gap between perceptions, it's like if you go to the blue sky in Shropshire, through a microscopic blue hole that appears once a year. Yeah? Then, when you're above, you say, oh, but it's blue sky all over. It has always been blue sky, right? But it looked like something very tiny between the clouds. But going to the experience of pure consciousness is in fact inaccessible to the mind. It cannot be represented in terms of perceptions, of phenomenal perception. As a result, there is no experience of time elapsing there. As a result, an experience of a state without perception that elapses in time, that has a duration, is a blank state. It's in fact an object that we project. And like a white wall or a blackboard, something like that, which seems to be that it's still a projection of the mind. And that's an obstacle that true seekers encounter when they are trying through their own effort to reach the experience of consciousness. They create in their mind an object, a mind construct, an imagination, a representation of consciousness, which is still an object, you see? And that is the blank state. It's a problem which is mostly encountered by yogins that have been taught that using all kinds of methods and meditation and slowing the breath, for instance, or slowing the physiology, slowing it down, they reach a state apparently, hopefully, without thoughts, without nothing, a blank state. The question is, if you have a blank state and if you're still bored, or if something is still lacking, what have you achieved? You see, it's not about having no perception. It's about having perception as being a happy camper. There is a story, I think I don't know whether it's in the Yoga Vashishta, because there are so many stories in the Yoga Vashishta. And that my teacher used to tell. There is this great yogi on the river of the Ganga in meditation, and there is a disciple next to him, and at some point the yogi says, "I'm thirsty," and the disciple goes to the river, picks up some water, comes back. When he comes back, the yogi is in samadhi. He cannot disturb the master, and so the students remain there, and hours pass by, days pass by, years pass by. Now, these are stories. Now the student has a long grey beard, waiting for the guru to come out of his samadhi. And it happened. At some point, the guru, and the first thing he says, "I'm thirsty." So, it took me time to understand why my teacher was telling this story. So it's not something that is easy to, but what he meant, as the desire he had, the need he had not been erased by this type of blank state, by something which has a duration. It had been put between brackets for all this period. But the problems, whatever the problems were, or whatever the dissatisfaction was, had been only postponed. And as soon as he came out of it, in other words, it was not a solution, this type of samadhi. It's just a state. So, on this path, we get this information so that we don't waste our time trying to to access meditation through any kind of effort. But rather to understand that we are already the consciousness, we are trying to visualize. Right? And whatever is here already appears in this consciousness and is made out of this consciousness. So we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait. You see, another example is this one that Atmananda tells a story that he was in this apartment or whatever, and he was trying to meditate, to go to this silent place. And then there was noise, there was the rickshaws in the street, and he felt bothered by it in his meditation. But then he understood, what is that? What is it? You know, that this noise bothers me, you see? Because this noise is the way consciousness is appearing to me in this moment. So coming noise. There is another story, I think it's also in the Yoga Vashishta, which is a story of the queen Emakuda. And Emakuda, she's married to this king, but she's more spiritual than the king. And one day in the forest, taking a walk, she meets this avadut and this sage, naked sadhu with a sage, and becomes a student and realizes her true nature. And after a while, the king realizes, oh, my wife is very nice. What happened to you? You seem to be happy all the time. Teach me. And she teaches him, and he goes into a samadhi, and then he opens his eyes. And immediately he closes his eyes to go back to it. And then the queen tells him, what is the value of such an experience that you want to go back to? If a small difference, such as the opening of your eyes, make it fade away.
Thank you.
It is a Krishnamurti quote.
That I understood, but what is the quote? I couldn't hear the beginning. Speak in the mic.
Okay. Beauty is where you are not. It is a tragedy if you don't see this. Truth is where you are not. Beauty is, love is, where you are not. I was very puzzled by this when I read this, and Bruce had a theory about this. His theory...
He means where you are not as a person.
Where you are as a person.
Where you are not as a person, that's it.
But I experience beauty...
As a separate person, where the sense of being separate is not present.
So if I experience beauty deeply, does that mean I am experiencing it directly through consciousness? Or
when we experience love, beauty, or truth, the sense of being a separate person is not present.
But you are experiencing a phenomenon. It's something is invoking the feeling of beauty.
It's a beautiful object is a phenomenon.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The beautiful object is a phenomenon.
Okay.
It is not the experience of beauty.
Okay.
Just as the words that lead to an understanding, they are an object. They are not the experience of understanding. That's why the same words can be understood or misunderstood. That's why the same object can trigger the experience of beauty or not. If the beauty was in the object, everybody would have the experience of beauty. The beauty is not in the object. The beauty is when we are not present as a separate entity. Now, there are two ways not to be present as a separate entity. One way is to temporarily forget it. The other way is to have taken care of this issue for good. It's like if you're a teenager and you want to have a party, right? You wait until the parents are on a weekend vacation, right? Then you have the friends and all of them. And you have the party, so it's a party. But it's not as good as if it was your own house. Because the parents, they may come back any time. You see what I mean? So it's a little, there is a little bit of a party pooper there. A potential party pooper. Well, it's your own house, fine, you know, you're not going to be disturbed by the parents. So that's a two-way. In one case, ignorance is still there, but went for a siesta just as the parents went for a weekend vacation, right? In the other case, the parents are out of the picture, just as ignorance didn't go for a siesta. Ignorance was killed. In other words, the aesthetic experience or the experience of love, everybody has it. In a moment when ignorance takes a siesta. In most people, ignorance is insomniac.
So would you say then it's a good practice to I take walks, I live in the mountains and I take a long walk almost every day. And I feel completely a part of that environment.
Yes, yes, beautiful.
So am I enlightened when I'm doing that?
Let me tell you something. Every time you're happy, you are quasi-enlightened. The only question is ignorance having a siesta, or is ignorance agonizing? Agonizing, is that? Dying.
Okay, thank you.
The happiness is always the experience of truth. So everybody has had the experience of happiness, even fleetingly. You know? So that's why people have the wrong impression, or the wrong representation of what the experience of consciousness feels like. They think it feels like something weird. No, or something different. No, it feels like happiness. That's all. When you see beauty, you're happy. When you feel love, you're happy. It's a common, when you understand, you're happy. When you understand a joke and you laugh, you're happy. So the common denominator of all these experiences is happiness.
I understand what you're saying, but the confusion for me is that I usually associate happiness or beauty or love with some phenomenon that is supporting that. A person, a beautiful thing.
In ignorance, that's the case, because we need a trigger.
Right.
We need a trigger, and the trigger is like the trigger is like a, how do you call this, prescription drug to sleep? A sleeping aid. It's like a high dose of sleeping aid that you give to ignorance. That's the trigger. The beautiful object, the music, the lovely dog. You see, all of this, the beautiful landscape all of a sudden. These are triggers. But like a sleeping aid, it's not sufficient to maintain ignorance at bay. So you need to give ignorance a poison pill. Coming here is a poison pill.
Thank you.
Just trying to get some clarification in your term experiment, because I go back to your experience with Jean Klein, where you spent 2 years trying to figure out doing this yoga and all that you did, how meaningless it was. My experience, and I know many other people's experiences, really kind of grinding it out for literally 50 years of every day meditating at a certain time, doing yoga, some pranayama, and I enjoy it. It's not, but to see it as a way to pure consciousness, I understand that. So I'm trying to figure out, do I just stop it cold turkey, which to me, before I started it 50 years ago, I was miserable. So I took to it to get rid of the whatever it was, and I think I've had some nice experiences. So I'm just trying to find, what do I keep, what do I throw out, what do I stop, what's the experiment, do I ever meditate?
It's like you want to travel from Florida to the French Riviera, right? You don't know how to do it. You start swimming. Then on your way, there are fishermen on the boat. They have mercy on you, they just hop in and will put you somewhere in some island. Right? And then in this island, there is this little plane operator tells you, okay, I'm going to take you to some other island. There are not too many islands I can think of between the French Riviera, but it's okay. I'm going to take you to, okay, you're on the wrong track, back to New York, and I leave you there, and just I give you here the money to take the flight to Paris or to Nice. You see, so there are different means of travel. Some are more effective than others. And on the path, it would be a little preposterous once you are in New York, right? To say, okay, I'm start swimming again. Just that we want something extraordinary, when it's in fact simple. To be open that this consciousness, which is hearing these words, is in fact universal. That's it. And if we believe it is not, we have to investigate, why do I believe it is not? Because that's the obstacle. So it's very different from saying Om Bhu Bhuva Swa Tat Savitur Varyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Not the same thing.
I have a question about the connection between the progressive path and the direct path. So typically in the progressive, you're taught objective, focused sadhanas.
What?
In the progressive path, typically you're taught objective, focused practices.
In the progressive path, we believe, absolutely believe to be a separate entity. We are a separate entity who has heard about the promise of enlightenment and seeks enlightenment, or seeks God.
Okay, I guess my questions may be different than the progressive path then. My question was, why objective practices like mantra, breath, or various other practices are considered preparations for a non-objective realization?
I don't know whether these practices are preparation they come from a desire for the truth. At some point, this desire gets fulfilled. A person can repeat the same mantra forever. And not get enlightened. There is a story about King Janaka, enlightenment. He was lying in the garden of the royal palace with his beloved wife or companion or partner, and they just had made love. And the fragrance was exquisite of the roses and whatever. The air, the temperature was perfect. They would look at the stars, and you can picture the scene. And then in the distance, he heard the Brahmin chanting the Veda. And that's it. Now, he didn't do mantra yoga, right? The Brahmins were doing it for him. He was just ready for it. It happened. So that in contradistinction from the one who is on the it has to happen. It happens when you hear the truth and something in you says yes. That's it. But then we don't want the truth, most of us. It's not enough. We want the fireworks, we want the naked truth is not enough. We want the Brahmin chanting the Vedas, the fragrances of the rose, the partner, and all of that. All of that was not important. All of that was pointing to the experience. And King Janaka had met his guru, Ashtavakra. I guess had asked all the questions.
And I just have one more question. I wonder if you can speak about the role of commitment.
The role of
Commitment.
commitment.
Yes. To awakening, to the path.
The commitment is both a sign and brings a certainty. It is a sign that we had a glimpse, and it is a certainty of happiness. If we feel ourselves, we know ourselves to be fully committed to the truth. My teacher once told me, Francis, one day you'll be very happy. And he was right.
Thank you.
The term happiness that you rightly use to constantly refer back to the experience of the infinite self. For me, it doesn't really fit. Because I think we all can think of happiness in slightly different ways. For me, it's more of a very, very subtle being at peace, rather than what I think about as happiness. Are there different variations in how that experiences arises for different people? Or is it just sort of semantics in that way?
Well, definitely it will, we are all different. It will manifest differently in different people, yes. But there are commonalities. And also there is kind of a progression over time, like wine that matures. So it communicates itself more easily with maturity. It's more explosive in a sense, it's more direct, more free. It's a form of freedom that speaks to our own freedom. And I wouldn't trust a sage who doesn't have much sense of humor. Or who take himself too seriously.